Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life. We're basing our study on Allan Kardec's Heaven and Hell. It is the second part of Heaven and Hell, where we are gifted with many spirit reports. These are real-life accounts of spirits who've come before us. They're discarnated, and they're reporting back to us of what their experience on the other side is like. And the beautiful thing is we also learn a little bit about their previous incarnations, so we can tie it into a nice picture where we can say, okay, I'm learning of how to be a better person, how to work better on my inner transformation, and prepare myself for my next steps, including my discarnation. Or we're looking at the cases and we're saying, maybe we don't want to do this because look what the effect of the causes we've created, the seeds we planted in our garden of eternity. Every second we have a choice, and it starts with our thinking and then in our feelings. It starts with our feelings and our thoughts. And as we think and feel, we emit. And as we emit, we attract. It's like a boomerang. It's the law of cause and effect. It's just like gardening. It's just like being a farmer. When we go in our gardens and we put seeds into the soil in the spring, they will grow. And whatever seed we're putting in, that's the harvest we will be reaping. So sowing is voluntary. Getting our harvest, reaping our harvest is compulsory. So let us be mindful. Today, we will have a beautiful, unprecedented case. Very interesting. It is Antonio B. That's his name. You can find him on page 516 in Heaven and Hell. And let me say hello to friends. I see quite a few. Feel free to say hello. It's always more fun in our intercontinental classroom to greet each other, to extend the love, because the love feels good. So Antonio B. So let us read about him. He was, and this is pretty grisly if we're really imagining it, he was buried alive. Can we even fathom that? He was buried alive. And the subtitle is The Law of Talion. So what is the Law of Talion? It goes back, it's called Lex Talionis, which is Latin, and this law dates back to the Babylonian days and the early biblical and early Roman days. And what does it mean? It means really an eye for an eye. So what we experience, what we are handing out, what we are creating comes right back to us. As we said, law of cause and effect. But this particular case is entitled The Law of Talion, Lex Talionis. So let's see what that means. Antonio B. was a talented writer. Esteemed by his fellow citizens, he lived in Lombardia and fulfilled a civil servant position with distinction and integrity. Around 1850, he fell victim to a condition of apparent death as the result of an apoplectic attack. Now, what is an apoplectic attack? It is something where suddenly the powers of the senses and the motor senses stop working. So there's no movement, there is no senses working anymore, and it comes on suddenly. And the reason for this is an effusion of blood in the brain. So there's too much blood in the brain. We don't want to go into further medical analysis, but we're getting a picture. So all of a sudden, all his senses stopped short. As sometimes happens, it was unfortunately mistaken because signs of decomposition seemed obvious on the body. 15 days after his burial, a fortuitous incident led the family to request an exhumation. It so happened that a medallion had been inadvertently left in the coffin. The assistants were terribly shocked when, upon opening the coffin, they saw that the body had changed positions. Whoa. That it had turned face downward, a horrible thing. Can we even imagine? That one of the hands had been partially gnawed on by the deceased. So when they opened up the grave 15 days later, they saw the body turned around, face down, and one of his hands had been gnawed on. So it was obvious that the unfortunate Antonio B. had been buried alive, and he must have succumbed to desperation and hunger. All right, let's see why somebody would have to experience something grisly like that. So let us keep on reading. Antonio B. was evoked in August of 1861 at the Parisian Society at the request of one of his relatives, and gave the following explanation. So we are very excited to hear the explanation. So it took him about 10 years to appear at the Parisian Spiritist Society. So do you remember, he's being asked, first question for him was, do you remember the circumstances of your death? And the answer is, of course, I remember, but why awaken that memory of punishment? So let us remember, these books were written about 150 years ago, and the word punishment was used, had a different meaning than today. Today, we see it more as a consequence, an effect of a cause. So let us replace that word punishment if we have an issue with it, because we know there is no punishing God. There's only love and justice. So let us rephrase it with effect. And I may say punishment again, but so we all know that that's not maybe the best word choice. Next question for him is it correct that you were buried alive by mistake? That is the way it must have been, since apparent death displays all the characteristics of real death. I had lost nearly all my blood, but no one is to blame for an incident foreseen before my death, for my birth. So he's sounding quite forgiving. So he's not an angry spirit who says, oh yeah, my gosh, how dare you? He displays understanding. So that is an interesting something to note for us. We would like to know if you are happy, he's being asked, for you left behind the reputation of an honest man. And he answers, thank you very much. I know that you have prayed for me. I will try to answer, but if I fail, one of you guides will help me out. So the next thing we're noticing is he is cooperative. He wants to help. He wants to share his story. And we're so grateful he did, because just imagine how many of us have learned from his particular story. What a beautiful service the Spirit is providing. So the next question for him is, could you describe the sensations you experienced during that horrible moment? And for those of you who have entered now, he was buried alive. So he was found 15 days after his discarnation in his grave with his hand gnawed on and his body turned around. So could you describe the sensations he's being asked? And he says, oh, what a grievous trial. Trial, he calls it a trial. Feeling yourself confined between four boards and not being able to turn around or move, exclamation mark. Not being able to scream, your voice no longer able to resound in an environment deprived of air. We may just remember, or we may imagine it's just a tiny, tiny speck of it when we're in dreams and something horrific is happening and we want to scream and we can't, right? Oh, what torture is that of a misfortune, being who vainly struggle, what torture is that of a misfortunate being who vainly struggles to breathe in an atmosphere depleted of air. Alas, I was like someone condemned to a furnace, only without the heat. Oh, I wish such tortures on no one. No, I wish no one on end. I wish on no one an end like mine. Allah's cruel punishment for a cruel and brutal existence. Hint, hint. So he's seeing it as a trial, It sounds like he sees the rightness of his suffering, of this horrific death. And he says that it is punishment for a cruel and brutal existence. All right, so there was something that happened before that last existence that warranted this death. Now let us remember, it is Eye for an Eye is the title. Don't ask me what I thought, but I plunged into the past and caught a vague glimpse of the future. Next question. You said cruel punishment for a brutal existence. However, your reputation intact even today would not lead anyone to assume such a thing. Could you explain it to us, please? So what happened is he lived a very good existence in that life that led up to this cruel death. So he was very much revered, and nobody could understand why he would so-called deserve an end like that. And this is all very important for us to note, because aren't we very prone to judging other people's lives? It may be the good aspects of their lives, because maybe we're envious, and or the torturous aspects of others' lives. They are a form of death. But tonight, we're being invited to see that our judgments are misplaced, and that we're invited to revisit our aptitude, our preference to jumping to conclusions, to jumping to judgments. And these judgments don't serve our own selves, because if we give judgment, we judge our own selves. We're always the first recipient of any thought or feeling. And we are not supporting the greater good, because judgments have a lower vibration on the scale of vibrations and are not linking us to God, because who is the only judge in this universe? The divine, beautiful, loving, caring judge, and that is God. We weren't born to judge. We weren't born judges. We're here to undo past mistakes, and we're here to work on our inner transformation, and hopefully we're here to serve, to be charitable. And charity, as it is defined by the spirits on high, the definition we can find in the Spirit's book is benevolence towards all, which means goodwill towards all. And it's indulgence towards others' imperfections. And it is defined as forgiving others' trespasses, others' incomprehensions. So judgment isn't part of charity. So now let's see. So we don't understand. How could he have had such a death and a good existence before? So here's the answer. What is the duration of one lifetime in light of eternity? Aha. Let's see. Of course, I sought to act rightly during my latest incarnation, but I had accepted such an epilogue before I re-entered humanity. So in other words, yes, he lived a good existence. He must have been a good citizen. He must have been acceptable in his choices that he made before God in his latest incarnation. But he accepted this form of death. And let's see why. Why question me about the previous past, grievous past, which only I and the good spirits sent by the Lord know about? We would like to know. Well, if you must know, I walled up a woman, my wife, alive in a cellar. Wow. So here it is. Here's the explanation, and here's our lesson for us. So in a previous, the incarnation before the last, he did exactly that to another human being. He walled off his wife in the cellar, in the basement. So she died of the same death that he agreed to die of in this last incarnation. And what is interesting for us is, again, we're going back to the judgment. If we see someone dying of a grisly death, instead of pleading with God and saying how unjust God is and how can that be, and this person was such a good citizen and such a good person, we don't know. Because as he teaches us what is the duration of one lifetime in light of eternity, we don't know how divine justice works. But we do know that divine justice is divine justice. That means it's infallible. It's always correct. It's perfect. It's not for us to argue with God. That would be what? That would be prideful. So we're invited to surrender to God's will. And God's will sometimes plays out in cruel moments. And it is something that the spirit who is suffering from this cruelty may actually have agreed to experience. And we see that in this case, he agreed to it. Let us continue. It's so fascinating, this case, isn't it? So it is the penalty of talion, which is the eye for an eye, lex talionis, to which I had to submit. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now we know Jesus came and taught us to return good for evil and not to punish others. But again, we're not the judges, right? We are invited to return good for evil, to undo our own past wrongs, and to practice charity. But in this case, God and the Spirit agreed to experiencing this lex talionis, this talion law. We thank you for having been willing to answer our questions, and we pray for God to forgive your past because of the merit of your latest existence. I will return later, he says. Besides, the spirit of Erastus wishes to complete this communication. So now we're going to get an explanation by the medium's guide. So let us see. We're getting a little bit more information. What you may infer, and this is quote unquote, now I'm reading, what you may infer from this communication is that all your existences are interrelated and that none are independent of any of the others. All right, so very important, right? All these incarnations for millennia that we've gone through, they're all connected. And whatever seed we planted in the past may yield a harvest at some point. We don't know when. That's up to God. There we surrender to God's will. But we, for our own lives, as well as observing the lives of others, are invited, thanks to this story, to not judge, to give up judgment. This is God's work. It's not ours. It's not our job to judge. Let us open our minds and hearts to the truth that we have no idea what the spirit who experiences the suffering, in this case, Antonio, who was buried alive, experienced in the past. What did he do that warranted this death? We have no idea. But we need to have faith that God knows what he's doing. I'm saying he. It's not he. God knows what God is doing. So this is the main message tonight, to really observe our humility. Where are we at in accepting the atrocities that are happening in this world without jumping to judgments, condemnations, making others wrong, even getting upset with God? Tonight we're invited to relinquish that. Doesn't that feel good? That's a burden we don't have to carry. It's not our cross to carry. Thank God. Thank God we don't have to be the judges, right? So the concerns, the tribulations, as well as the great sufferings that afflict humans. So again, the concerns, the tribulations, as well as the great sufferings that afflict humans are always the consequences of a previous criminal or ill-employed life. He says always. This guide, this spirit says always. So when we see atrocities, there is something, there's a rightness about it, because it links that spirit to something that they had done previously, which led them to be prone or open, that allows them to have this experience. Antonio B's blameless latest existence ended in such a death. He had a blameless latest existence. And then we look around, right? And then we see people Exactly like Antonio. They led the perfect life. And then they die of some horrible situation. Now, we've learned not to judge. And then we see people who we judge as being criminal, and we don't see the punishment that we think they should get in the moment. But again, it's not our job to judge. It's up to God. Let us relax. It's between them and God. It's not for us to take care of. But what is for us? It's like taking care of this one, my backyard. I need to clean up my backyard, not the neighbors. It's my backyard. It's my inner transformation. I need to work on myself. And in this today, we're invited to work on our judgments. Let them go. Give them up to God. It's actually really hopeful, really good news, right? One thing less. So let's see. So Antonio B's blameless latest existence ended in such a death. It was because he himself had asked for it, with the aim of shortening his errant state and more quickly reach the higher spheres. There it is. He even asked for it. And how do we know that what we're observing out there in the news or among people we know, and we judge it and we say, oh, poor this and that, X, Y, and Z. They may have asked for it. Isn't it much more powerful, much more supportive, much more charitable to pray for them so that they have the strength to carry the cross that they forged for themselves? What does Emmanuel teach us? In order to undo the shackles that we have forged against our own selves, he says, the shackles that we have forged, we're the only creators of our own shackles, that we have forged against our own selves. We need to seek goodness. We need to feel goodness. We need to visualize goodness. And we need to mold goodness with all the resources we have at hand. That's a 24-hour job. That's our job. All right, let's continue. In fact, after a period of trouble and mental suffering to further expiate his heinous crime, he will be forgiven and will go to a better world where he will find his victim, namely his wife that he walled off, who awaits him and who already forgave him long ago. What a beautiful situation. So he expedited his development, his inner transformation, his undoing his past wrongs by experiencing this excruciating death. And as a result, he's allowed to graduate from Earth and go to a higher world even. And then that allows him to reunite with his former wife, who already is waiting for him, who already forgave him. How beautiful is that? How beautiful. Let us keep that in mind next time we feel the tickle to judge a situation that we don't know anything about. Because everything we look at is just a snapshot. Because we're very much current. We don't know what happened before. We don't have those faculties, most of us. So it's just wait, and we have a keyhole perspective on life. Let us remember that. And that keeps us more humble as well. Only God knows. All right. Thus, learn well from this cruel example. Thank you. Learn well from this cruel example, my dear spiritists, so that you may patiently bear mental and physical suffering and all of earth's miseries. See, we're invited to patiently bear mental and physical suffering and all of earth's miseries. Because now we know. We don't know. We're not judges. So then, what advantage can humankind gain from such punishment? How does humankind gain? How does it gain from such a punishment? The question is. And the answer is, consequences do not occur in order to develop humankind, but to consequence the guilty individual. So this is not for the common good that this guy was walled off or that he was buried alive. No, it is not for that purpose, but it is for him to expiate his past action that was cruel and criminal. Frankly, humankind as a whole has no interest in the suffering of one of its members. In this case, the punishment fit the wrong. Why are they insane, mentally impaired, and paralytic individuals? Yeah, why? Why do we see mentally insane, mentally impaired, and paralytic individuals in the world? Why do some die by fire? Why? Why do some suffer the tortures of a long agony, unable to live or die? We see it every day, right? Believe me, respect the sovereign will and try not to probe the reason behind the decrees of providence. Know that God is just and does only what is good. There it is. So God is just and God does only what is good. Divine providence is loving care. Divine providence sees everything and is always there to help. But we need to do our share, and sometimes our share is being buried alive, like in this case. So now, this was from the Spirit Erastus. And now we're going to a small print explanation by Allan Kardec. Doesn't this example contain a great and awesome teaching? We think so. Definitely. Thus, God's justice always reaches the guilty, and although it may arrive late sometimes, it does not fail to follow its course nonetheless. It is with mathematical precision that the effects will catch up with the causes we created. So it will always, and this is confirmed here, God's justice always reaches the guilty. And although it may arrive late sometimes, and we may get the impression, oh, I got away with this, nothing's happening, I'm still healthy, I still have this, that, and the other. Maybe not down the road, right? Isn't it eminently moral to realize that if greatly guilty individuals live their existence peacefully, and often in abundance of earthly assets, the hour of expiation will nevertheless sound sooner or later? Yes. So isn't it eminently moral to realize that if greatly guilty individuals who live great lives, and we see that so often, right? Where we know this wasn't right what they did, even public figures, we don't have to worry, because here we hear it again, that their hour of expiation will nevertheless sound sooner or later. It will. It always will catch up with everyone. Punishments of this nature are understandable, not only because we can witness them somehow, but also because they're logical. We believe in them because our reason accepts them. Makes sense, right? Thus, an honorable existence does not exclude the trials of life, since one has chosen or accepted them as a supplement to expiation. So this is really important. So if we're wondering, well, aren't there mitigating factors, right? So I've committed this crime and now I may actually be aware of it, right? Maybe it happened in this lifetime and nothing has happened to me yet. But now we may feel fatalistic and say, oh, okay, so I'm just going to wait for the hammer to come down on me. No, we're learning here that doing the good, living a good existence, and living a good existence means working on our inner transformation, which inevitably leads us to becoming more charitable, to study and to serve. Those are the two wings of the human being, of us, that need to be strengthened equally, because a bird can only fly when the two wings are equally strongly developed. And that's what we need to do. We have one wing, which is wisdom, knowledge, studying, educating ourselves, and the other wing is love, is service. And both need to be active, need to be strong. And that is our work. And if we focus on that, here we learn, we're creating some merit. We are undoing past wrongs while we work on that. We'll read it again. Thus, an honorable existence does not exclude the trials of life, since one has chosen or accepted them as a supplement to expiation. So the supplement for Antonio B to his cruel death of being buried alive was living the life of an honorable man. It helped him further to eventually, in his case, graduate from planet Earth. He was allowed to go to a higher planet. It is the remaining balance on a debt that we pay before we receive the award for the progress we have accomplished. And that was for him being buried alive. If we consider how frequent acts of barbarity were in days gone by, but which shock us so much nowadays. Pause for a moment. In 2,000 years ago, 50 years later, during Jesus's time, shortly after Jesus's time, enduring, and we see it actually how Jesus was murdered, how cruel. And the early Christians, they were pulled apart by lions, by wild animals in the Colosseums, in those big arenas with the masses roaring, wanting blood, wanting these heinous crimes committed. It's barbaric. And then when we read 50 years later and 2,000 years ago, how the Romans just poisoned anyone who was in their way and they didn't like and they didn't want to get out of their lives, they would just poison them. There was no immediate consequence by the human law. Very barbaric. So these are just some examples. So what he's saying, if we consider how frequent acts of barbarity were in days gone by, even among the highest and most enlightened classes, how many murders were committed in those times when the lives of others were disregarded and when the weak were unscrupulously crushed by the powerful, then we will understand that among our contemporaries there must be those who have cleansed their past. One will no longer wonder at the considerable number of persons who succumb as victims of isolated accidents or general catastrophes. The despotism, fanaticism, ignorance, and prejudice of the Middle Ages and of the times that followed bequeathed to future generations an immense debt that has not yet been liquidated. Many examples of misfortune seem to us to be undeserved solely because we can only see the present. So here, this is it, friends. This is our summary for the day. Since we have this myopic view of reality, the keyhole perspective on life, all we see is the present. We totally blank out our own past lives because we don't know them. Most of us don't even know what we've done. And we don't look at the collective debt either, because he's alluding to the fact that there's catastrophes that people succumb to these days. They may be natural catastrophes. They may be plane crashes. They may be, there's so many different aspects where people die in groups and one wonders why they have to go through this. Well, here we're learning that they may have been part of a barbaric group in the past. The Middle Ages are not that far away. So we're still expiating, according to these accounts, heinous crimes that were committed in the Middle Ages. And so it makes sense, right? So what is the summary? What are we taking away from today's case? Our dear friend Antonio, who thankfully came through and helped us understand a very important aspect, and that is to not judge. We don't have the means, we don't have the faculties, we don't know, because we are too limited. Our perspective is too limited. We're not gods. What we need to do, we're here to expiate our past wrongs, which means we're here to do the good always. We're here to educate ourselves and to love, to be of service. We're here to surrender to God's will, and that may be in our daily activities, but also to our own suffering and observing others' suffering, knowing that God is infallible. He is infinitely just, loving, and caring. God knows. There is never a mistake. So for us to argue with God, to think there's a mistake anywhere on this planet, would be very presumptuous. It would show that we need to work on our pride. So dear friends, let us complete our study with a prayer. And let us call in, since we are talking about suffering, let us call in Mother Mary, who dedicates her life to the Valley of Suicides, who is working there to help the spirits that are the spirits who are most in pain. And she is always ready to support anyone who is suffering. And if we see suffering on this planet, we are invited to call in Mother Mary and her warm heart and blue cloak, helping those in need. Let us close our eyes and connect with God and Jesus and Mother Mary. Dear God, dear Jesus, our guide and model, Mother Mary, the mother of all mothers, we thank you for allowing for us to meet tonight. And thank you, Antonio and the Parisian Spiritist Society and Allan Kardec and the mediums, the Spirit Erastus, for helping us understand the importance of rather examining the plank in our own eyes than focusing on the speck in others, to always be merciful and to work on our inner transformation so we become more good-willed, more indulgent, and more forgiving, so that we will focus on educating ourselves to understand the bigger picture, like tonight, thanks to Antonio reporting back to us, to surrender our will to God's will and never to never judge anyone, no matter what, how big or small the situation may be, as we don't know. We don't know what others are thinking and feeling. We don't know what their past was like. But one thing we know, God is always right. God is just, and God is love. And with this, and so much gratitude also to Kardec Radio and the mentors of Kardec Radio, the mentors of this group and our own mentors, who are always aligned with God's love and justice. We're closing tonight's radio program, and so be it. Dear friends, thank you so much for joining Mark and Nora Bazil and Luke and Parry and Victoria. And there is more, but I don't see you. Thank you so much. And so God willing, we will see you again in a week, same time, same place, with a new case from heaven and hell. God bless you, friends.